Greetings citizens of the world. An intriguing Ministry of Defense (MOD) report circulating in the Kremlin today states that for the first time since President John F. Kennedy sought to destroy the Central Intelligence Agency (CIA) over its disastrously failed Bay of Pigs plot to overthrow the Cuban government in 1961, President Donald Trump has, likewise, moved against the CIA in destroying its Islamic terrorist private army in Syria, while at the same time U.S. military forces continue to pour into this region under Russian Air Force protection. According to this report, since the Islamic State, ISIS/ISIL, Daesh, terror organization exploded onto the world scene in 2014, then President Barack Obama refused to allow the arming of Kurdish forces that was favored by the U.S. military to extinguish this global threat, with his choosing, instead, to massively fund a classified weapons supply and training program run by CIA known as Timber Sycamore that allied the U.S. with al-Qaeda terrorists. By 2015, this report continues, this Obama CIA classified terror training program had managed to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, but whose results showed it only having trained 60 Syrian terrorists to take on ISIS, and who astoundingly cost $4 million each to train. With the CIA's millionaire terrorists having no impact whatsoever on battling ISIS, however, this report notes, by the middle of 2016, the U.S. military-backed Kurdish forces continued to rack up victory after victory, and with the Obama regime even perversely claiming credit for them doing so, while at the same time it continued to deny the Kurds the arms they needed for this war. By September 2016, in the heated atmosphere of the U.S. president election, this report details, the U.S. military's hatred and anger towards the Obama CIA plot to arm Islamic terrorists broke into the open when a former U.S. Army Green Beret officer associated with covert operations in Syria spoke out to a prominent military news site, called SAFREP, blowing the whistle on details surrounding the CIA's use of jihadists to overthrow Assad by his stating, "Nobody believes in it. You're like, fuck this. Everyone on the ground knows they are jihadists. No one on the ground believes in this mission or this effort, and they know they are just training the next generation of jihadists, so they are sabotaging it by saying, fuck it, who cares?" In retaliation for this U.S. Army Green Beret telling the truth, though, this report grimly notes, barely 8 weeks later, in November 2016, 3 of his fellow Green Beret Special Forces soldiers, Staff Sergeant Matthew C. Llewellyn, Staff Sergeant Kevin J. McEnroe, and Staff Sergeant James F. Moriarty, were brutally murdered by a Jordanian soldier employed by the CIA at their secretive Timber Sycamore base in Jordan, and that the Obama regime covered up the true facts of. To the rabid consternation of the leftist American mainstream propaganda media, this report continues, upon taking office, President Trump unleashed his generals to fight ISIS the way U.S. military forces in the past fought against the German Nazis and Japanese Empire during World War II, called total war and whose effects are as equally destructive today as the destruction of German and Japanese cities by U.S. and Allied forces, and as evidenced by newly released British intelligence documents showing that the retaking of Mosul from ISIS by U.S., Kurdish and Iraqi forces has left, at least, 40,000 civilians dead. With President Trump's Secretary of Defense James Mad Dog Mattis recently stating that the Trump administration's policy against ISIS is now annihilation, MOD experts in this report note, the stunning success of this total war approach by Trump to these Islamic terrorists has been breathtaking to behold, as in just 6 months since he became president, ISIS now faces extinction in central Syria as the Grand Pincer movement to annihilate them gathers steam. Not being able to participate in the destruction of ISIS, however, this report continues, is the CIA with President Trump, just hours ago, ordering the complete dismantling of the Obama CIA Timber Sycamore plot to arm Islamic terrorists, and that to date has cost the American taxpayers over $1 billion, with nothing to show for it but the murder of 3 brave Green Beret soldiers. With the CIA's private Islamic terrorist army now being dismantled, this report details, President Trump is pouring in massive amounts of armaments to the U.S. military-backed Kurdish fighters who are currently engaged in a tense street-by-street urban battle in ISIS's Syrian capital of Raqqa, and that under the Strategic Dialogue meeting held, 17th of July, between Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov and U.S. Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Thomas Shannon. The MOD agreed to provide Russian Air Force support for Russian Air Force protection of U.S. military forces backing the Kurdish fighters battling ISIS in Syria, this report explains, was an urgent necessity requested by President Trump and Secretary Mattis after Turkey, a NATO nation and supposed U.S. ally, on Tuesday, 18th of July, shockingly published in their state-run media outlet, Anadolu Agency, a detailed map of 10 secret U.S. military bases, airstrips and American Special Forces troops locations in Syria. President Trump's turning against the Obama CIA plot to arm Islamic terrorists in Syria, along with his massive success in destroying ISIS, this report concludes, can be found virtually nowhere being reported to the American people, and who are, instead, being fed a continuous stream of mental sheep food by their fake news media organs decrying New York City's now banning people from walking dogs and preparing for a nationwide broadcast of a parole hearing for a sports celebrity accused double murderer, which is to be expected when farce overtakes reality.